Most of us trust that when someone is hurting or being harmed, the people meant to help them will say so clearly. Will name what's happening, will name them find their way out. But what really happens when the very space designed for healing quietly teaches someone to stay in the harm's way? What happens when the burden of adapting to something cruel falls on the person being hurt? And tonight's conversation would ask a difficult question about the state of mental health care and what it actually means to help someone who is suffering. Welcome back to Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, the show where we have honest and grounded conversations about what it really means to be well. I'm your host, Sayan, as some of you would know, and my guest tonight is Sheri, a licensed clinical social worker, trauma-informed psychotherapist, certified coach, hypnotherapist, and ordained interfaith minister with over 3 decades of clinical experience in New York City, now based in Montreal. She specializes in complex trauma, CPTSD, and narcissist abuse syndrome, and she is herself a survivor who has walked this road and come through the other side. She's also the author of Clinician's Journey from Complex Trauma to Thriving, and her work has been featured in Forbes, HuffPost, Reader's Digest, and beyond. So, Sheri, I think that's a lot of things in the intro right there. So, I'm really glad that you're here tonight, and I think this is going to be a brilliant conversation.
Oh, thank you, Cyan. I appreciate your having me here.
Thanks, Shetty. Likewise. And just a little disclaimer for all the listeners here. Some statements may reflect personal belief and experiences and are presented as individual views and not medical advice. Listeners should consult qualified professionals for medical conditions. So, Shetty, before we get into any kind of clinical or ethical territory that you have worked with, I want to firstly acknowledge something. Since you are both a clinician of 3 decades plus experience and a survivor of this complex trauma yourself, so I think that dual perspective is rare, and I think it also shapes everything about how you see this particular work. So, can you tell us a little about what that personal journey has really meant for you? How you show up as a therapist, and if it indeed, um, I would say, made a decision in your life that you need to do this work because there are people that really need you.
Okay. Um, well, because I was born into a family of generational mental illness, schizophrenia, cluster B pathology, I was always uh, intrigued by the human condition and wanted to, I guess, get a sense of mastery by understanding human nature. And so I early on, I either kind of was torn between did I want to be a writer or a clinician. Of course, I was very fragmented and splintered and needed to start therapy very young. And I also started living on my own as a young woman, uh, put myself through college and graduate school. So intellectually, I guess that was the developmental milestone that
Okay.
was a part of my personality that I was able to kind of cling to. But other than that, I was pretty broken. But I did know that I wanted to pursue academia either through I was interested in journalism or I was interested in psychology. And the pathway for me into complex trauma was very difficult because at the time, complex trauma was not even a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Right. It was first diagnosed really, I think in 1994 by a Dr. Judith Herman. So
Okay.
I pursued therapy because I knew that I was afflicted. I with tremendous despair, suicidal ideation, process addictions, and the pathway, what it taught me, my recovery process was that this is a journey that is comprehensive, extensive, and requires a level of commitment and effort that spans, if not many years, sometimes decades for some, depending on the enormity of traumatic abuse they endured. So I started working out in the addiction field where I met women who were sex trafficked. I worked with people who were a forensic population who had gone through the prison system. And that's where I really first encountered traumatic abuse that in some ways it was different than mine, but in many ways replicated what I had been through. And that started informing, I think, my clinical orientation and a deeper understanding of what was involved in recovery. It also
Right.
illuminated for me, I think, a lot of what you're bringing up, which is that often victims are not believed.
Hmm.
And so that contextually, I think, relates to um, how therapy can actually become a a place that is re-traumatizing as opposed to being reparative.
Wow, I think that is indeed shaped by a lot of early experience, like you said, Cherry. And yeah, I think trauma is something that I personally think it just lives beyond decades, right? It's something that um, lives for pretty much throughout your whole life until it's really treated the right way. While we would definitely talk about that aspect, but the concern that you have really raised for this conversation is, I think, one that I think many people in difficult relationships or harmful situations might recognize, right? That this experience of going to therapy for help and coming away with tools to cope with something rather than s-
Mhm.
question it, right?
Yeah.
Leave it without naming any specific approach or method. Yeah. So, can I
Right.
perhaps describe in very broad terms what this pattern looks like from a client's experience?
From a client's experience, I think it's very shaming, but it comes across as being helpful. The idea that one should adapt or find effective tools to accommodate abusive behavior. To even, I think it could be in the form of a spiritual bypass. The idea that if you're a good person, then it's a moral imperative to accommodate all kinds of egregious behavior and to find common ground, even with people who are malignant. Now, there are some clinicians who will scoff at notions of human evil, and so that becomes very confusing for a victim who has been on the receiving end of the most heinous kind of abuse. I even had a client years back who she was as a child by her brother, and she was violated, and it turns out as they grew into early adulthood, he was exhibiting sociopathic, psychopathic behavior. But
Mm.
she was not believed by her parents, and a clinician framed it as exploration, as play. So by the time she and I started working together, we had to really start looking at instinctually the level of terror that she had experienced throughout her life, which obviously is not indicative of play. Right. It's very simple. The body knows what the mind is not able to reconcile with. But she was not believed. Right. She carried with her the premise that she was exaggerating. And she had all kinds of somatic disorders that she was grappling with as a result. So, um, how it feels for the client is that it is re-traumatizing, it's confusing, demoralizing, um, and shaming. Eventually, what I have found is many of my clients end up leaving that form of treatment because they feel they're just not seeing themselves evolve, heal, grow. And so that's when they decide to leave that kind of treatment model and pursue something different.
Okay, and I think you're right. It makes a lot more sense because I think that confusion itself is part of what really makes this whole process so difficult to navigate. I mean, And people find it really hard to really articulate it from the inside out, because it's having this sense that you're being helped and that
Mhm.
someone is really caring for you, and yet something is still isn't right. So I think that confusion really becomes a challenge to make them believe and steer away the confusion. And Shari, you have written that at the ethical core of therapy, the work should not, I mean, the work should disrupt harm, in other words. So not accommodate it to some degree, I would say. So I think that's a really interesting and a powerful statement. So what do you really believe healthy and ethical and therapeutic support actually looks like in a harmful situation? What should they experience in that moment, in that room?
I think that clinicians, particularly in trauma informed work, first of all, need to take an ethical stance, not just a neutral stance. We are witnesses to stories of traumatic abuse. And as witnesses, we need to name the abuse that the survivor has to trivialize, minimize, even wall off in order to stay psychologically tethered, right? Because can be so psychologically annihilating to have to accept these harsh realities. So I do feel it's a moral imperative for therapists to name malignant behavior, sadistic behavior, to not minimize it, particularly when it's parental. That's where I think it gets very sanitized, because we want to hold on to, I think, these fictitious narratives that um, parents mean the best. Anecdotally, I always hear, well, they did the best they could. It's like, well, if that's the best they could, I mean, that's really horrifying. Um, so when we hear of criminal um, behavior that crosses a line between what is into moral depravity, we need to hold that space and bring evil to a level of consciousness where it can be worked through and assimilated so that the survivor can heal, because they need to grieve what was done to them and what they were robbed of.
Uh, I think that's an important distinction, because I think it it really distinguishes between a space that helps you survive something and a space that I would say really helps you see it clearly enough to make real choices. And I think for a lot of people, they don't really realize that they're allowed to ask these kind of questions. They assume that the therapist is always, he or she knows the best. And what you're saying right now is that your own instincts and perceptions deserves to be part of that conversation. So one thing that I also find it very interesting that you've spoken about the importance of helping people trust their own perception. So I want to
Mhm.
continue and build on that. So for someone who has been in kind of a harmful dynamic for a long, long time, that sense of trusting themselves can be one of the first things to really go. So why is self-trust, Sherry, so central to real recovery, and what does it actually do to your, inner system?
You mean in terms of uh, having lost contact with self-trust or your own perceptions?
Yeah.
Because I think that's really what happens initially. People don't come in to therapy after traumatic abuse and have access to their instinctual awareness. That has to go underground in order to survive. Otherwise, one would just implode from a deluge of adrenal hormones. We'd be saturated with so much cortisol, which happens anyway. I mean, people have lucid moments, of course, and then lapse into dissociative states. Reclaiming instinctual awareness is one of the therapeutic goals in treatment and trauma informed therapy. And a lot of that requires the therapist to be a mirror to help interpret and to help the client to identify the ego defenses that they had to employ to survive, to start to dismantle um, some of the anecdotal fictitious ways in which we try to cope and make sense out of what is happening to us. So it takes a while to really access the body's wisdom. And a lot of the work at first then is identifying what's happening with the nervous system. Is the client in a state of freeze, which is really a state of playing dead? So that's a real extreme level of terror. Is someone a fawner? Do they typically pacify and assuage to try to navigate through relationships and through difficulties? Or does one fight, and become very aggressive and reactive? Or does one take flight and completely retreat and avoid? So these are all kind of sensorial indicators of how the survivor has coped and really then having to find a sense of regulation, and the therapist is a co-regulator. So in a way, the client borrows from the therapist and being able to get grounded in the sessions, to feel calm, to feel seen, understood. And that allows one to have a baseline of safety so that one can start to reclaim their perceptions and trust what they know in their deepest place of knowing.
And that's a very important frame, I think, in what you're describing. And since you have spent over 3 decades with this work, with navigating complex trauma and CPTSD, so from where you sit, Sherry, I just want to ask you this one last question out of curiosity. I mean, we have talked about the good side of things, and how from the very early days it I mean, this whole process and the work itself did intrigue you, but has it ever costed you anything? So what?
The process of recovery.
Yeah, of I mean, helping people
Oh.
navigate through this whole uh trauma therapy, and from where you sit, I mean, with so much experience over, I mean, over 3 decades
Mhm.
of experience. So um I mean, from what you have seen as a survivor, as a clinician, and as a writer and a creative, so what really keeps you in it, right? And do you have you ever felt that it really costed you anything? Because at the end of the day, Sherry, I mean, everything has its pros and cons. So I'm
Yeah.
curious to know what is your thought process on this, and because I think it really takes a lot to hold this much of other people's pain over that time.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely compassion fatigue that I have to recognize, and I have resourcing that I have to do for myself, pacing myself. um, but I guess one of the things, if I look at it as a cost, I don't know if I look at it as a cost anymore, but I think there is a disillusionment that one has with the human race that comes with
Yeah.
being exposed to so much brutality.
Oh yeah.
Um, I am a spiritual person, and I do believe in divine energy and the beauty and wonder of life and nature and creativity. But I do feel there is such a dark side to the human condition, and I have a lot of questions for my maker, when my time comes. It does it does necessitate actually having to be very intelligently guarded. Um, I I sometimes I think I see things that other people may not see because of the exposure I've had to so much traumatic abuse in my own life and in those I witnesses in my clients. Um, so there's cynicism, there's definitely I don't scoff at notions of human evil. I know that human evil exists and is cloaked in virtue. I understand how it works. It's like borrowed from psyops. It's the same playbook. It is cunning and pernicious. And so I carry within me an awareness, of a level of danger and moral depravity that I think most people don't reckon with, and that's informed who I am. I don't know if I'd say it's is it costly? Um,
Oh no, maybe it's a gift because I think I this part of the conversation really touched me, and I think that really resonated with me, Sherry, what you shared, because when you said that, you have a, like, you understand the beauty, and, since you said you're a spiritual person,
Mhm.
I'm a spiritual person as well. But indeed, there are so many, I mean, God forbids nobody gets to experience that brutal side of the human surface, but because you have seen it and experienced it, and now you work with clients, indeed, I mean, this kind of, um, you know, I think this kind of commitment to this work, I would say, it really comes from utmost compassion and passion for the work, of course. So I think, this is something that I really resonated with, and I think, yeah, for the listeners who perhaps resonated with this part, and or perhaps the whole of conversation, Cherry. Before we just wrap this off, where's the best place for them to find you, explore your practice, or simply if someone needs help and wants to work with you?
I have a website. My name is Sheri, I spell it Sheri, so it's sheritherapist.com, and that's one word. And the website really is an encapsulation of all of my work. To my blog on Medium, um, some of the articles that I have contributed to. And so I'd be happy to have anyone come visit my site, and you can contact me through that particular platform.
Brilliant. So I'll have the details in the show notes so that people can easily uh, reach out to you and explore your practices, or simply send a connect to you. So folks, with that, unfortunately, we hit today's minute mark from this conversation. But what I'm really sitting with after this conversation, and I also, by the way, want you to sit with it for a few minutes as we wrap this off, is that real healing is not about learning to carry what harms you more gracefully. I think it is about being supported to see clearly and trust yourself fully and move towards life that is genuinely yours. So that is something that I would like you to take forth from today's conversation. And Sherry, I think conversations like these are the ones why this show exists, and to create space for the things that needs to be said honestly and with real respect for the people living them. So I think I really enjoyed your take and your insights from this conversation.
Oh, thank you, Cyan. It was great to share on your platform. Thank you for making the space for this.
Absolutely. And folks, if today's episode did something in you, please to share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you or someone you know is going through a difficult phase in time, please reach out to a trusted mental health professional who can support you. And please to subscribe to Healthy Mind, Healthy Life wherever you listen, and come back next time. This has been Cyan. And folks, take good care of yourselves today, and we'll see you in the next one.